Good morning. I'm Dr. Sara Whittingham, and it's an honor and a privilege to be here this morning to share my journey with Parkinson's disease with you. I am an introvert, a list maker, and a goal setter. I don't love getting up in front of crowds, but I feel my message is important, and I would like to share it. I hope that in some way that my talk inspires you and gives you the tools to help you to change your lives for the better. I have divided my talk into 3 parts. Part 1, I'll talk about my journey since my diagnosis with Parkinson's disease in 2020. Part 2, I will talk about the progression of Parkinson's disease and why exercise is important. And it will take a brief intermission because if you're anything like me, after sitting in one place for 20 minutes or more, I'm either asleep or so fidgety I need to get up and stretch. So we'll take a quick 5-minute stretch break before we come back to what I think is the most important part of my talk, which is how on earth are you going to be able to sustain and maintain an exercise program for the rest of our lives? I'm going to start with a brief 4-minute video that summarizes my story up to this point. I'm Sara Whittingham. I'm an anesthesiologist at Cleveland Clinic Marymount Hospital. I'm also a clinical faculty member here at Northeast Ohio Medical University, and I have Parkinson's disease. I'm probably the luckiest Parkinson's patient in the world, because one of my favorite hobbies and thing I'm most passionate about, which is, fitness and running and racing, I love to race, is the thing that's going to help me the most and help me to keep ahead of Parkinson's disease.
I was sitting on the couch one evening and I noticed a tremor in my arm, and I didn't think much of it. I think I was probably in denial, but my husband talked me into going to talk to the neurologist, and he confirmed that I had Parkinson's disease. I was devastated. I didn't know if I was going to have to stop doing the job that I loved, and I thought that I would probably be disabled in a few short years. I suffered from anxiety and depression. I wasn't sleeping well. I gained 30 pounds.
In a way, I feel like I went through the stages of grief, grieving for the future that I had previously seen for myself. I was super fortunate to come across this research study put on by Dr. Jay Alberts at Cleveland Clinic, studying the effects of cycling on the progression and management of Parkinson's disease.
And I quickly realized that the more that I rode the bike, the better I felt. And so over the course of the year-long study, I got up to being able to ride the bike for an hour at a time. And I had the thought that if I can ride the bike for an hour, I can probably ride the bike for 3 hours. And if I can do that, I could probably finish a half Ironman again. Something I hadn't done in about 5 years. Those first 2 half Ironmans after my diagnosis went way better than expected. And so I thought of a new goal, and that was to get to the finish line at Ironman Kona, the most epic race in all of triathlon. 9 weeks before the race, I found out that I had been selected to compete as an ambassador athlete. Somehow I ended up on the Today Show, and I was able to share my story there with the hope of educating and inspiring others living with Parkinson's disease. In addition, I was able to share my story at Ironman and bring awareness to how Parkinson's disease is affecting our post 9/11 veterans. An Ironman triathlon consists of a 2.4-mile swim, followed by 112 miles on the bike, and then a 26.2-mile run.
I get all teary-eyed when I think about making that right turn onto Leahy Drive towards the finish line. When I was first diagnosed, I didn't think that, I would even be able to run a 5K again. Just being able to be out there and push myself, I still love it. I feel the biggest goal that I could think of to accomplish when I just, is the finish line at Kona. And I am so lucky to have this opportunity to do that and hopefully share it with everybody else with Parkinson's and realize that we're all in this together and we can make a difference in each other's lives.
Nothing, not even a Parkinson's disease diagnosis, can stop Sara Whittingham in her mission to show what is possible with self-belief and an iron will.
So my journey, like most people diagnosed with a life-altering disease, like most people, I was completely overwhelmed. I pictured my future based upon what I had learned about Parkinson's disease as a medical student over 20 years earlier. And in my mind, this is what my future looked like. I felt like I was going to be on a progressive decline over, in my mind, I was thinking 10 years, because this guy in stage 0, I'm thinking, is in his 60s or 70s, and that this is what I envisioned my future would be. I could not have been more wrong. I felt sorry for myself, I stopped exercising, and I gained weight. And the apathy component of Parkinson's made it so that I didn't even really care that I was overweight and out of shape. I had side effects from every medication that I started. After falling asleep at a red light on my way home from work one afternoon as a side effect from excessive daytime sleepiness from one of my medications, about a year after my diagnosis, I tearfully talked to my leadership about maybe going on disability. Instead, they assured me that I was okay, and they gave me a month off work to meet with my doctors, readjust my medications, and to try to process all of this. During that month, my doctor made a few medication adjustments, and I realized that the trajectory that I was on was not going to end in a good place. So I sat down and I made a list. I made some goals. At that point, I was partway through Jay Albert's cycling study, and I was making good progress. But with the extra time, I really ramped up my cycling, and I began to feel a lot better. My husband, at this point, had already signed up to do Ironman 70.3 Ohio, which is a half Ironman distance triathlon in Sandusky, Ohio. I made the goal to make it to the finish line. Sorry, get emotional. Make it to the finish line of that race. And I secretly signed up. I didn't tell anybody because I thought it was such a crazy idea, and I didn't need anybody else telling me how crazy it was and discourage me from that. When I got to the race, it went much better than expected. I beat my goal time and was able to earn a qualifying spot for the half Ironman distance World Championships. And I also beat my husband. We have an ongoing rivalry, and I like to point that out because he's here today. About a month after that, I was watching the Ironman Hawaii documentary, as I do every year. And in 2022, it featured the story of Chris Nikic, who was the first person with Down syndrome to finish an Ironman. And after seeing his story, I had the courage to believe that I too could again finish a full Ironman distance triathlon. This is the clip that part of the clip that inspired me of his story. That's the Ironman Ohio finish and my trophies.
And Chris Nikic forges ahead on a mission to change perceptions and challenge others to believe that they too are capable of so much more. His approach of striving each day to make small incremental gains, an approach he calls 1% better, has helped him achieve goals deemed unattainable for someone with Down syndrome. He has come a long way since the Ironman Florida finish line. But Kona is his most ambitious goal yet.
Good job. Little break. What? All right, here we go. Oh, buddy. I know the pain is there. You're gonna get there today, okay? Remember the last time we did this, it was hard too? Remember it was hard? And you pushed through? And you told the stories to everybody about how you pushed through? This is like that time, okay? Come on, let's show them what you can do. Come on. 3 more cones, that's all. Ready? Come on, go. Yep, let's go.
And with 30 minutes to spare before the 17-hour cutoff, Chris Nikic is the first person with Down syndrome to attempt and finish this race. The coming days will reveal just what this groundbreaking achievement means for others with Down syndrome. The impact one person can have in changing perceptions.
So obviously after seeing this, I was inspired. And it occurred to me that my story may be inspiring to others and could potentially help others living with Parkinson's disease. And so about a month later, so in December of 2022, I wrote Ironman, and I told them my story and that it was my dream to make it to the finish line at Ironman Hawaii. And I waited. In May, I did a half Ironman in Tennessee, and I was training for a fall marathon when, in the beginning of August, I got a phone call from Ironman offering me a slot to compete at Ironman Hawaii as an ambassador athlete. The race at this point was only 9 weeks away. I realized that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I said yes. And my husband thought I was crazy, wondering how on earth I was going to get in shape for such a big race in such a short period of time. But I sat down, and I made up a plan, and I got to work training. In addition, I realized that I would have a platform on which to share my story at Ironman. And I wanted to make that platform about more than just me, and I wanted to make it bigger. And so I let my movement disorder specialist and Dr. Jay Alberts at Cleveland Clinic know the exciting news that I would be competing at Ironman and that I would be sharing my story there. And that if they wanted to share it with their patients in their community, that they were welcome to do that as well. A few days later, I got a phone call from a member of the Cleveland Clinic communications team, and I told her my story. And she said that she was moved, and she asked if it would be okay if she shared this with her friends at the Today Show. I said yes and kind of giggled, thinking, wow, that would be really cool, but I'm really not that interesting. But a few weeks later, we got news that they would be picking up the story. In addition, I was able to share my story at Ironman as part of an ambassador athlete panel, and I've had a sit-down media interview with the Ironman team. At the end of that interview, the photographer and producer were looking a little bit emotional, and they asked if they could include me as one of the featured athletes for that year's documentary. This meant that I had motorcycles and drones following me intermittently throughout the race, and they sent a film crew to film the backstory here in Cleveland afterwards. Sorry. Where I am here. So here's pictures of the Today Show. On the day of the race was everything that I hoped it would be. It was fun, it was hot, it was exhausting. And things were going well until about mile 80 of the bike, when I got overheated and a little bit behind on my Parkinson's medications. And I realized that I still had 2 hours left to go on the bike and a full marathon. I pulled into an aid station. The volunteers were awesome, gave me lots of ice to put down my shirt. I took some of my medication and started to cool off. I looked around at the beautiful scenery, took in the fact that I had this opportunity, found a reason to smile, and got back on the bike and continued on. I'll let the video tell the next part of the story. To mile 25 of the run, and there on the corner is Chris Nikich and his dad. And I say, you're a huge part of the reason that I'm here, is because I saw your story last year. And he grabbed my hand and he just held it so tight and said, come on, you're okay, you go. And then you saw the finish, and I can't talk about that because I'll get all emotional again. So afterwards, there have been a lot of media attention, which I've used to help raise awareness about the importance of exercise to both patients and caregivers and also physicians, and also to raise awareness about how Parkinson's disease is affecting our post-9/11 veterans and the importance of research with Parkinson's disease. I gave a recent talk at Northeast Ohio Medical University about my advocacy work, which is on YouTube if you want to learn more about all of that. Part 2, why is exercise so important? Oh, sorry, that's the film, when the film crew was here in Cleveland. Oh, I got ahead of myself. We're not quite to part 2 yet. So the film crew came to Cleveland. They filmed the backstory. And as part of that, they came to In Motion and had an interview with Dr. Jay Alberts and also Ben Rossi. That video has been seen around the world by triathletes, and a lot of people know people with Parkinson's disease, so I hope the word has spread around the world about the powerful work being done at In Motion and the power of bringing people with Parkinson's disease together to exercise. So like I said, this has been seen by over 250,000 people around the world. 4, 3. I realized, too, that the people who were sharing their stories with me, that was helping me more than anything else. And so, going to In Motion and meeting other people my age who had been already living with Parkinson's for 10 years and were still there exercising, and that kind of got rid of that image in my mind that, oh, I'm going to be using a walker in a couple years.
We are a complete wellness center for people with Parkinson's disease. Our wellness community is about physical wellness. It's about intensive training for specifics that you need for Parkinson's. We know that exercise is as powerful as a dose of medication for people with Parkinson's. We see it every day. We see people come in here and change before our eyes. People with Parkinson's have the power to change their script, period.
1, 2, 3! Great job, you guys. Appreciate your hard work today.
So like I said, my story has been featured in Women's Health Magazine, Air Force Academy publication, USA Today, and Men's Journal, sharing that message and my advocacy work as well. This was recently on 5 o'clock news here locally with WKYC, sharing my work about advocating for disability benefits for post 9/11 veterans with Parkinson's disease. So part 2, now we get to part 2. Why is exercise important, and how does it in slowing the progression? So doing an Ironman is a little bit extreme, and I have no intention of trying to convince anyone that you need to get to the finish line of an Ironman to combat your Parkinson's symptoms. We are all in different places in our journey. Some of you have been recently diagnosed, and some of you have been living with this disease for years. For those of you recently diagnosed, know that you are not alone. And for those who have been living with this disease for years, I hope that I can continue to learn from your journeys going forward. We are underdogs in the biggest fight of our lives. You have the power to write a script that makes you and your story something that inspires those around you. We are each fighting our own battles against this Goliath, but together we can help each other stay motivated against this undefeated adversary. One of my favorite underdog movies is Rocky. In many ways, we are like Rocky. We are unlikely adversaries against an opposing and undefeated opponent. We will go several rounds against Parkinson's. We will win some and take a beating in others. We will fall down and need to be bandaged up and encouraged by our support teams to get ready for the next round. We will have bumps and bruises, and we may not win in the end, but by training for those moments, we will be more resilient and have the strength to get back up and go the distance and have been worthy opponents. Multiple studies have demonstrated that high cadence, intense training can have profound effects not only on the progression of the disease, but on our overall well-being and management of symptoms. It helps our anxiety, our sleep, our constipation, and our stiffness. If there were a medication or a surgery that could do all of these things, we would be fighting our insurance companies and willing to pay a fortune for that medication. And yet we as a society have struggled to maintain an exercise program. And as a result, we all continue to get more and more out of shape. As Parkinson's disease, it becomes even more critical that we exercise, and yet it is even more challenging. We have more excuses. I'm stiff, I'm tired, I just don't care. It's a dangerous battle and one we must work every day to avoid. By fighting every day to train our brains and bodies to overcome the ongoing destruction, we can continue to live full and meaningful lives for years to come. This is a slide many of you have seen, and I saw some brochures out at the In Motion table from the Parkinson's Foundation about what types of exercise are recommended. And I think the point here is a large variety of different types of exercise are important, not just one thing, and make it interesting and a lot of different activities. So aerobics, strength training, balance, and stretching. And there are countless ways that we can do this. This is just a list I brainstormed one afternoon, and I'm sure there's a lot more that you can think of, or you can make up your own way to exercise. The point is there's countless different ways that we can accomplish this. I showed this slide earlier of what I pictured the progression of Parkinson's disease to be. I have made up my own version of what I see the progression of Parkinson's disease. And I call this Parkinson's disease progression, Sara's version. So baseline, I put about 10 years before our diagnosis. And this is before we know that we have Parkinson's disease. And we're not taking medications, and we're probably not exercising, and it is that slow, steady decline. And then at some point, our symptoms get severe enough, we're having some symptoms during this period of time, but nothing to make us really go to the doctor or take seriously. At some point, we end up developing a tremor or something that is concerning enough to go see a doctor. And we get diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and we get started on medication. After starting medication, most of us feel a lot better. I know that after I started medication, I felt better than I had in years. And with that medication, with that bump, we probably won't get back to where we were before we started our declines, but well enough that we can feel better than we had before. And over the years, we'll have slight declines. We may get sick or injured and then have increased medication or have periods of time where we're able to exercise more. So we'll have various ups and downs. And with each up, we may not be able to get up to the level that we had been previously, but with hard work and consistent exercise, I believe that we can flatten out the overall trajectory of the downward decline. Recently, my most recent appointment with my movement disorder specialist, he shared with me my Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale scores since my diagnosis. For those of you not familiar with this scale, it's a scale from 0 to 260, where 0 is no Parkinson's symptoms and 260 is complete disability. And I flipped this upside down because I like up to be good and down to be bad. So 0 is at the top, so no Parkinson's symptoms is at the top. So at the time of my diagnosis, I had not started taking any medications, and I was at a 16. My movement disorder specialist started me on medications, and 3 months later, I was down to a 7. I had not started exercising seriously again yet, and during that following year, was when I struggled with anxiety and depression and weight gain. And you can see I had a progression down to about 10. They estimate, on average, it's about 3 to 4 points per year is about the normal progression of this disease. So that was pretty normal. I really hadn't started exercising yet. It was this point where it says added more medications, where I added more medications and started exercising again. And you can see that with that, that my scores improved drastically, up to a 5 in the fall of 2022. The last year, there's been a slight decline, but I also would like to add I have had no medication changes in over 2.5 years, so since that point where we last added medications. And so I feel this is my data, about that with exercise that I have been able to drastically slow the progression of this disease. And so instead of this, which I find incredibly harmful in my mind of what my future looks like, I have proposed a Sara's version of what I think Parkinson's disease progression should look like, where stage 0 here is we may be a little overweight and out of shape. We don't know yet that we have Parkinson's disease. Stage 1, we get diagnosed and we decide to start exercising. And we set some goals and we meet those goals, and so we set some bigger goals and we get in amazing shape. And then over time, we do get older and slower, and we may not be able to be as fast as we used to be, and the disease still progresses slowly, but we're able to keep exercising. And eventually, we may have to start walking or doing other activities to modify them, but we continue to stay active. So this is my optimistic version of what that chart should look like. Maybe overly optimistic, but it's good to have goals, right? So now we made it to part 2. So that was part 2. So now we'll take a quick 5-minute break, kind of stand up and stretch out, and then we'll talk about how we can go about accomplishing these things. All right, well, welcome back. That intermission was as much for you as it was for me, because I think this last part of my talk is the most important. And I wanted you to be fresh and energized and ready to learn how it is that you can stay motivated to exercise for the rest of your lives. I hope my story that has inspired you and that you are motivated to start exercising, but all of that is useless if you can't figure out a way to maintain it over the long haul. I will give you some tools that I have learned along my journey to stay consistent and motivated to keep exercising. I've been competing as a distance runner for over 40 years. I've also taken on challenges in multiple other arenas, and I have been able to take lessons learned from multiple arenas and apply them to my battle with Parkinson's disease. These include lessons that I have learned from other people living with Parkinson's disease, lessons I've learned from my role as a mother, as a physician, as an endurance athlete, and from my years of military service. There are all sorts of ways to approach this journey, but I found that the most helpful has a foundation based in gratitude. After my diagnosis, I had the opportunity to meet other people living with Parkinson's disease. And through them, I learned the power of gratitude and also the importance of finding humor in the weirdnesses associated with Parkinson's disease. One of my favorite Michael J. Fox quotes is gratitude makes optimism sustainable. If we can find something each day for which to be grateful, we can help keep that positive mindset. It can help us stay positive about how we perceive our symptoms, how we interact with others, and how we see ourselves when we look in the mirror. And it makes sustaining the level of intensity a fun endeavor and not something that we dread. I have learned the power of humor. I was super fortunate to meet Dr. Karen Jaffe and her husband very early on in my journey. And as you know, Mark is a comedian. And so hearing his story, and I still haven't had the opportunity to see his one-man play, side effects may include, which I hope someday is brought back to life. But they have been able to raise over $1 million for the Michael J. Fox Foundation with the power of humor. An analogy I recently read on Facebook about what it's like to live with Parkinson's disease made me smile, and I realized that it's a pretty accurate analogy. And it was from a woman who's been living with the disease for over 20 years. And she describes living with Parkinson's disease like living in a giant game of whack-a-mole. And I love this analogy because who doesn't love playing whack-a-mole? And it seems pretty accurate to me. Weird, annoying symptoms will pop up out of nowhere. And we have to find the tools and the techniques in which to beat them back down, either all the way or part way. And over time, as we get more advanced, it gets harder. You go up a level. And new weird things start happening and popping up at greater frequencies. But hopefully with our years of experience and the tools that we've learned and the resilience, we are able and ready to take on the next level of challenges. A few examples of moles that I have been able to smack back down into place. The first is paddleboarding. On a family trip in summer of 2022, I was determined to be able to stand up on the paddleboard. The beginning of the week, I was cruising around on the ocean on the paddleboard on my knees and on my butt, but at the end I was determined that I was going to be able to stand up. And this is me trying to stand up on the paddleboard. You'll see I'm stiff and rigid. And I am trying to use, you can't really see very well, but I'm trying to use the oar to balance, to tripod myself so I don't fall over. And my children are sitting on the beach, highly amused at the entertaining show that's happening of me trying to stand up. And of course, I fall in. So before our next trip, I get a BOSU and I practice. And before our next trip, this is what I was able to do, my silly human tricks. And you can see that my dog is very impressed. So just by practicing, I was able to make that big of a transition. And so the next time we went back, this is me on the paddleboard. And I was amazed at how easy it was to stand up and that I was able to keep my balance and to stay balanced and enjoy standing up on the paddleboard. And another mole that I've squashed is the challenge of dual tasking. And I learned this from a recent appointments with Parkinson's-specific physical therapists, in which she had me practicing with these blaze pods while doing other things. And so this is my friend Rita. She's a track teammate from the Air Force Academy. We recently got together. But basically, you can see she has an elastic band around her waist, and these blaze pods laid out different colors. And in this case, when it hits blue, you're supposed to touch it, and then it changes again. So the goal is to hit it as many times as you can within a minute. And so it's surprisingly like whack-a-mole, which is good. But this is her trying to do it. And you can see it's fun. So tools like that, where you're practicing doing more than one thing at once with balance and coordination and thinking about more than one thing, I have found to be super helpful. So those are some examples of moles that I have put back in place. The next lesson I'm going to share with you, I learned from my role as a mother. And this is my 3-year-old daughter after I returned from Afghanistan, giving me a lecture about my future.
Ever.
And so, as many of you know, arguing with a toddler is pointless, but she makes an excellent point and one that I have held true to. Learning to ignore the negative and focus on the positive is incredibly powerful. I learned the power of this, interestingly, from books on parenting, specifically the Parenting with Love and Logic series. The entire premise of these books seemed completely counterintuitive to my husband and I, who had both come from a military background, where bad behavior is immediately corrected. The basic premise is to ignore or don't give attention to the behaviors you don't like in your children and catch your children being good and focus your energy and attention on the positive behaviors. And that over time, the behaviors that you don't like will eventually go away and the behaviors that you're paying attention to will become more prevalent. It worked shockingly well and took a lot less energy and was much easier than taking on battles that could not be won. Unfortunately, our Parkinson's disease will not just go away if we ignore it, but flipping the way that we interact with it and think about how it's affecting us can actually change the way that this disruptor affects our lives. I would argue that my life has more purpose now, and I'm able to help more people as a Parkinson's advocate than I have in my last 20 years of practicing medicine. There are days after a hard workout where it's painful to get out of bed, but instead of thinking that it hurts, I enjoy the fact that I worked hard and I know that I'm getting stronger. I marvel at the fact that after I get moving and do some yoga, I feel so much better. Spending time and wasting energy perseverating about what we cannot do or how we hurt or that Parkinson's sucks is completely counterproductive and takes a lot more emotional and physical energy with no return on investment. It's like arguing with a teenager or a 2-year-old. They will never let you win. Instead, change your mindset to that of gratitude. I am grateful that I can get out of bed in the morning. I am grateful that I live in a place with water and heat. I am grateful that I have medications that help. All of these thoughts will help you get into a place where you can be grateful that you can exercise and that the exercise is helping you. Look in yourselves the same way. When you get up in the morning and look in the mirror to brush your teeth, what do you see? Do you see the conquering hero that's ready to go to battle with this disease? Do you see your strength and determination? Do you laugh that your hand is shaking so much that it does the brushing for you? Do you see the years of wisdom in your eyes? Take time to notice all the great things that you see. And if you see something that you don't like, set that thought aside and focus on the positive. The next lesson I'm going to talk about is something that I've learned in my years as a physician. I'm an anesthesiologist, so I see people coming in during a very stressful time in their lives. And I see people who come in with a positive attitude, who think who are very grateful and appreciative and have a positive attitude that everything's going to turn out okay. And I also see people who come in who are convinced everything is going to go wrong and nobody knows what they're doing and have a negative attitude. And I've often wondered if anybody had ever looked at the long-term outcomes of the patients who believed that they were going to do well versus not. Because in my experience, it seemed to turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy. Those who believed that they were going to do well, did well. And those who didn't, even though they may have done well, in their minds, everything is still awful. And so I looked up to see if anybody has researched surgical outcomes, and I didn't find anything. But there has been quite a bit of research in long-term outcomes in stroke patients, cardiac patients, chronic pain patients, diabetics, and cancer patients, looking at with varying degrees of disability, looking at differences in those who are optimistic about their futures versus those who are not. Across the board, people who reported to be more optimistic had better outcomes, fewer infections, lower cortisol levels, fewer inflammatory markers, and lived longer, even in those who had, within that group, had greater levels of disability or worse prognosis to begin with. Most of these were self-reported levels of optimism and their perception, but even so, it cannot be ignored that the power of the positive and doing your best to ignore the negative, because when you ignore the negative, it becomes less significant. The next lesson I'm going to share with you is something that I learned as a distance runner. Like I said, I've started running with my dad when I was about 6 years old and have been running pretty consistently through then. There have been a few gaps here and there, but over the long haul, I've managed to stay active for over 40 years competing. The next tool I'm going to talk about, I learned on my own, but later read about the peak end rule in psychology. and it explained why I could stay more consistent in my training if I started my run at the bottom of the hill instead of at the top of the hill. When we lived in Utah, we lived at the top of a very large hill. This meant that anytime I went for a bike ride or a run and started at home, that at the end of my workout, I would have to ride my bike or walk my bike up the big hill, or I would try to run up the hill and I would be tired. And so my workouts finished on a sour note. After I'd taken a break from running, it occurred to me that maybe I should drive down to the bottom of the hill and start my run so that the last mile was a gradual downhill. So now I finished my run feeling strong and fast, and it was a good experience. And as I drove myself back up the hill, I had pride that I had a good run, and I looked back at it in a positive way and something I wanted to do over and over again. I recently read about the peak end rule, which said that how people remember something is almost completely based on the peak experience of that event, especially if it's something traumatic, and the very end of that event. So another example would be my Ironman. There were hours and hours of suffering, both training and at the race. But when I look back on the day and the experience, this is what I remember, and this is why I have signed up for more. Another example is you're watching your favorite football team on a Sunday afternoon, and they're winning the entire game, and you're having a really fun afternoon, and then they blow it at the end, and they fall apart. When you look back on that game, you'll think of what a terrible game it was. Or flip that around. Your team's playing awful, and you're mad, and you're yelling at the TV, and your blood pressure's up, and you're throwing things because your team keeps making one mistake after another. But somehow they come back and win it in the end. When you look back on that afternoon, you'll look at the fun afternoon you had watching football. Even though you were miserable for 3 hours, you had fun for 2 minutes, and that's what you remember when you look back on that experience. When we take on hard things, it's important to find a positive peak and to always end on a positive note. No matter how bad the workout goes, always do something fun at the end and have gratitude that you gave it your best. That way, when you look back on the experience, you look back at it as a positive event and something that you want to do over and over again. Remembered experiences that are positive are easier to get excited about than those that are remembered as painful or uncomfortable. We should still push ourselves to discomfort regularly, but celebrate that and your strength for doing that, and finish every workout and everything that you do hard in a positive way. Whether it's going out to coffee with friends, tie that to a difficult workout, so that when you look back on the experience, the end of that experience is tied to something that's positive. I enjoy a hot shower after I get out of the pool on a cold morning, or a hot chocolate, or celebrating the fact that I get out there and get it done. The last lesson that I'm going to talk about is experiences that I've learned during my years in the military. And these pictures, so that's me on the top left in my BCGs, or birth control glasses, as they like to call them, with my roommate Vern. And then at the bottom left is getting ready to go jump out of airplanes, and that happens to be Rita to my right, who you saw in the Blaze Pod video. And then on the right, on the left, are two of my other track teammates from the Air Force Academy who came to cheer me on at Kona Ironman, Sierra and Jenna. And Jenna is also another physician who deployed to Afghanistan, who has also been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. As a freshman at the Air Force Academy, you get yelled at a lot for silly things or anything that they can think of to yell at you about. And it's the expectation that if you hear that one of your classmates is getting yelled at, no matter if it's for something silly or they did something that wasn't that bright, the expectation is that you go stand at the side of your classmate in solidarity. And if they have to get down and do push-ups, you do the push-ups with them. And this makes going through difficult times with somebody else a lot easier. A big problem for people with Parkinson's disease is becoming socially isolated, especially if you haven't shared your diagnosis with others or you're no longer working. It is important to have a social network and people who understand what you're going through, who will be by your side when things get hard. And it helps if it has at least one person who's gone through or who's going through what you are. I think in motion, the social aspect of what happens there is just as important as the exercise part. And I love going there and seeing people interacting and sharing kind of the funny things that have happened to them since their diagnosis. So all these tools are fine and good, but where do I start? How on earth does one faced with all of these challenges begin a journey to get in the best shape of our lives? Exercise is our most important job. We need to set aside time each day and protect that time fiercely. I found for me that the early mornings are best because nobody's trying to schedule my time at 5:30 in the morning. And I don't have to worry all day about something's going to come up and I'm not going to be able to get it done. Each of us is starting in a different place. For some, walking to the end of the driveway and back will be a challenge. For others, running may be a challenge that you wanted to try to get back into. In any event, wherever you start, write down what you're able to do now. Right? I'm able to walk 5 minutes, or I'm able to walk to the end of the block. And then write down some goals of what you'd like to be able to accomplish a week from now, a month from now, 6 months from now, and a year from now, and get to work. I like this mnemonic about goal setting. Many of you have probably already seen. But a goal should be specific. It should not be, I want to start walking more. It should be, I want to be able to walk 20 minutes 3 times a week in a month from now. Something that you can actually achieve. And so that when you do achieve that goal, you can celebrate that fact and then make a bigger goal. Another tool that I found helpful that is kind of grouped with everything is finding things that I like about each activity. And I don't expect you to be able to read what's on the little fine print there, but these are just screenshots off my iPhone. But with each activity, difficult activity that you do, find things that you enjoy about that activity and write them down. And so that when things are hard and it's difficult, that you are able to set aside those negative thoughts and replace them with something on your list. So for example, for me, it's difficult to get up at 5 in the morning to go to the pool and get in the cold pool before I go to work. The pool opens at 5:30. And so I have a list in my head of things I like about going to the pool. So when I get in the water and I feel the water going underneath my swim cap, or feeling the power in my legs when I blast off the wall, or feeling a little bit unsteady when I get out because I know I've worked hard and had a good workout, or getting in the shower at the end and that feeling of accomplishment. So that when I'm thinking about whether or not I want to do that activity, or as I'm doing it and it's hard, I can set the negative thoughts aside and replace it with something on my list. And I found that this tool has helped me to stay mentally tough when things are hard by having things already written down of things that you like about that activity, so when it's difficult, you can replace that thought. So I have teenage daughters, so this is nonstop. Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, for those of you who are not time. But it's important to have an off season too. Fitness is a journey. There will be ups and downs and periods of high intensity and periods of low intensity. It's important to take some downtime too. I found this most helpful after I accomplished a big goal. Take a week or two to not completely stop exercising, but cut back a little bit and take that time to spend some time doing other things that you maybe have been set aside, and to set some goals for the next season. It's very difficult to maintain high level intensity over long periods of time. And it's by having an off season, it gives you your mind and your body time to recover and heal and be ready to take on the next round of challenges and intensity. That way, when the break is over, you are ready to go to start ramping it up again. The route that is going to turn you into a superhero, at least in your own minds, requires determination and focus, but in which you get stronger. Whether you are 45 or 85, we all have the ability to get stronger and to become better versions of ourselves. We must harness our internal Muhammad Alis and fight every day like our lives depend on it, because they do. The biggest causes of morbidity and mortality for Parkinson's disease are complications after a fall, being sedentary, and swallowing. We need to do everything we can to be resilient enough that we can bounce back from these challenges that we will face along the way. And to end on a positive note, when we compete in triathlon, they often write the age of the competitor on the calf, so that when you're getting past or passing somebody, you know whether or not they're in their age group. And I'm always the most inspired when I see 70 and 80-year-old people out there doing triathlons. I am more inspired by them than by the people who win the race. Just as I am more inspired by watching this race than I will be when I watch the 100-meter dash in the Olympics this summer. This is the 100-meter dash in the 85 and over division at Penn Relays. The men in this race are ages 85 to 96. The man in lane 2 is 96 years old.
We are in the blocks for the starting position for our Masters men's 100 meters dash. 85 and older. Fred Edelstein, Ed Cox, Jim Dunleavy, Bob Williamson, Larry Colbert, Joshua Buke, James Durkin, 85 plus. Look at him go. Arms pumping. And in lane 5, Bob Williamson, 86 years young. How about lane 1, Fred Edelstein as well.
And Ed Cox, the 96-year-old, getting it done here at Penn Relays. Track and field is for everybody.
And it is forever, as these gentlemen are showing. Look at that sportsmanship around. Bob Williamson, 86 years old. Potomac Valley Track Club takes the win, 1750. How about Ed Cox there in 6th? 96 years old. He's Syracuse.
So I love seeing the camaraderie at the end too. So arguably these men probably don't have Parkinson's disease, but they probably face a lot of the same challenges that they do. And by staying active and socially engaged with others and setting goals, they are able to get out there and have fun when many of their friends from younger days are probably in a nursing home. So with that, I'd like to, if you would like to learn more about my story, I am on Facebook. It's open to the public. My whole journey from Ironman, I've kind of documented through there. I gave a recent talk, as I mentioned, at Northeast Ohio Medical University about my advocacy work. There are links to the Today Show interview and also the Ironman documentary also on YouTube that we can share afterwards, or I'll put links up on my Facebook page as well, up closer to the top. In addition, I have a reading list of books that I've found helpful along the way to help me stay motivated and engaged. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Thank you.